Everybody, it's Andres at the Baking Steel Studio today, coming to you live. We are making our 72-hour dough using bread flour. I have a new brand today, trying out. First time for pizza dough is farm to flour, organic bread flour. These guys are kind enough to send me some. They mill this stuff and ship it out like the same week. It is incredibly fresh. I made using this, I made some English muffins and loved it with their all-purpose flour. Today, we are doing some pizza dough. I'm going to walk you through my steps of making a 72-hour pizza dough at home. Let's get right to it. The things that we need our flour. We need our digital scale, so we can measure everything in metrics. I'm using my dough containers here. I've got 500 grams of flour in my container. And next I need to add 16 grams of sea salt. I always pour my hand first, just so I don't overfill. Push the envelope right. So I add 16 grams of sea salt in, and I literally just take my my whisk and I whisk it. You guys can see, just whisk it up. Okay. I'm out of my baking steel container. I have more coming. So it's a little bit big, but in any case, got my my sea salt. My next, I'm going to add some Fleshman's active dry yeast. And I do this by adding 1 gram. Which is micro. That's 1 gram. You can see, toss it in my bowl. Again, whisk it up. Right? And lastly, I'm going to add some water. That's what I whisk. Let me just measure this again, put it back on my scale. Zero out my scale, which I do that by the tare button, and I add 350 grams of water. To me, it's like having 1 big cup. Now I take my ingredients. I use my spatula and just kind of, I'll remove this from the bowl in a second so you guys can see what this looks like. I'm incorporating the water and the flour together right now. I whisk my dry ingredients. And I incorporate my water, which is filtered water. And now to remove this from my bowl. I'm just doing this so you guys can see what's going on here. All right. Now I just take my mixture and press. I might do this for 2 or 3 minutes. And you can see, I like to scrape underneath as I'm going. I do this for about 2 or 3 minutes, and I know for me, it's formed this one big ball, right? And I know right now it's going to start to get sticky in my hands. I'm basically incorporating the water and the flour together. I'm pushing out any dry clumps that are in the flour. I do that by pressing down. And I do this for 2 minutes. You can see my tell in this dough is about done. It gets super, it's starting to get really, really sticky. And that's when I know I've got it hydrated well, flour and the water together. I've got all my dry clumps out. I will literally take this down. I will take that dough. I'll put it back in my container. It's like this. And I will cover it and let it sit for 24 hours. That's my dough. I let that down. That was it. That's my entire method, my madness, which is why I want to have, it's so simple. I want to use the finest ingredients I can find. And for me, that is about getting organic bread flours. I'm using farm to flour here. It's a great product. We'll link up to it. Central Milling has a great product. You can find these online, these micro mills all over the country. You probably have some local farms. I highly recommend it. Just try some out. And like Mark earlier in our discussions, took two of his favorite flours, an all-purpose flour and a bread flour, and he combined them 50-50. And he created his own recipe. Essentially, he's got this beautiful all-purpose flour with the bread flour with a hint of honey inside, which is gonna make it really nice, beautiful flavor. That with fermentation over 2 days, 3 days is gonna add more complexity to that dough, if you will, and just add some incredible flavors. After 24 hours, we can take our container and place it in the fridge. Okay, so tomorrow I'll come in, I'll take my container. That's not my baking steel container. This one's a little big, but these will fit in my fridge. I'll place those in my fridge overnight, and I will do that for about 2 more days. So ultimately, I'm going to do a 3-day fermentation. If I don't have 3 days, for example, if I want to make pizza tomorrow, I will take my dough batch that I made tomorrow. Instead of putting it in the fridge, I'll make dough balls. And the way we do that is by measuring, however you want to do it. I measure about 250 grams of dough. I'm going to make a dough ball right now for you so you can see that process. Again, I like to ferment my dough first at room temperature for 24 hours. Then I will move it into the fridge for another 2 days. The day I make pizza is the day I will portion it off and make my dough balls. Which is what I'm going to do. The way I do that is take a little flour. Look at this nice, beautiful color, by the way. This, it looks very almost like earthy, right? I coat it with flour because it's very sticky. I just kind of fold it in half like this, then turn my hand sideways. If it gets stuck on my hands, I use a lot of flour. Okay, flour is your friend here. And I'm going to do is kind of press this in and close it, and turn it, press it in, and close it. When I press in, I'm pressing in delicately. I'm not like squeezing super hard, just lightly pressing and closing, and then turn. I'm always keeping the smooth side facing my chest and the seam side out, like facing you guys. I just press into the seam and then close and turn. Each time I do this, this dough ball is getting more and more taut. I'll just do this for a minute. See, I'm just following the same sequence. Smooth side goes into my palm, and I can close this off aggressively, and I've got a dough ball. Seam side goes down, and I'll cover these. I'll use I can use my containers again, put it in here, cover my container, make it airtight, let those dough balls sit for about 3 hours, and I will have pizza. That dough will do its final proof. My oven's preheating. I actually made a dough ball earlier. That thing's gonna be ready to fire up in about 2 hours from now, and I'll make a pizza this afternoon. I'll bring it home to my kids. Beautiful, right? That'll be a 24-hour fermented dough. Gorgeous, tasty, make a nice cheese pizza. It'll be amazing. Let's get to some questions, you guys. Ordered bread and AB flour. Vicky's got some flour coming. I love it. Great to learn about new brands. Yes, and this one is Farm to Flour. I'll link this up on my Instagram and on an email to you guys. It's a really nice flour. I love it. This is my first time making pizza with it. I love the English muffins. Let's get to some questions. If you don't have a scale, can you provide measurements? Laurie, yes, great question. We do and we can. It just will not be as accurate. The scale is going to dial in the water to flour ratio, which is critical to pizza making and bread making. However, I realize some of us don't have the scales and they're just anxious to make it. You don't have it. So I would use 2 cups. 2 cups of flour, 1 cup of water. Okay, literally a cup. And I'll add about a tablespoon of salt and 1/4 teaspoon of active dry yeast. And I will mix all those up and it works. I've measured it. It does do a good job. It's not the greatest, but I don't want to scale that up or down. That's going to make about 2 doughs. You just be mindful. It's not going to be perfect, but you can work with it and it does work. What does the pinch on the bottom do? So Mark, all I'm doing is I'm actually taking my dough ball and closing that seam. I'm encapsulating it, if you will. So I pinch it aggressively so there's no openings in that ball. So all the gases are kind of trapped inside. So as this thing tries to expand, right, the yeast and the natural gases try to lift, get out of there. Well, it just rises, makes the dough create these air pockets inside. It does rise and it might spread, but because we've trapped all those natural gases inside by closing and pinching. I hope that makes sense. Please show the bag of special flour. I do try and mill my own wheat berries. The dough looks very easy. Yes. This is farm to flour. It's their organic bread flour, unbleached. It's awesome. Farm to flour. And Central Milling has a good product as well. And there's a lot of other ones as well. Karen Springs, amazing flours. They've sent me some flour. I've used it for English muffins and pizzas. It's great. Is there any advantage or disadvantage if you form the dough balls after the room temperature, but before the cold ferment? Great question, Mark. Our earlier version of our dough recipe, we would ferment it for 24 hours, make dough balls, and place those dough balls in the fridge for 2 days. What we found is that by making those dough balls that early in the process, they tend to overproof in the fridge. So in other words, we're not really dialing that in if they're keeping the balls in the fridge for 2 days, because they could start to proof and expand too fast, even in the fridge. So what we've found is that by dialing in that final proof, which I believe is about 3 hours, so that by the time I make my dough ball to the time that dough proofs is about 3 hours from start to finish, that dough will become very relaxed and easy to stretch. And it's really helping us dial in. They call that the final proof. It really helps us dial that in. Again, and there's going to be some bakers who, when I say dial in, they want to know that dough temperature. When they make their dough balls to, the final proof temperature of that dough throughout the entire process, and they will dial that in. And so we're being more generic here. We're saying we ball up our dough at room temperature, which to me is about 70 degrees. I make my dough ball. I let those sit for about 3 hours at 70 degrees. Now, winter time is different, right, than summer. So it's gonna be hotter and cooler. We're using generalities here. So just be mindful of that. 3 hours does seem to be a pretty clean number. Does it have to be sealed plastic container for proofing the dough, or will a bowl and towel work? Yes, a bowl works great. I love these dough containers. Ours just came back in stock because they have lids on them, which is really nice. I think I gave my last one away to a guest that was here. So I have more coming, but they're nice because if you don't have a lid, then plastic wrap is fine. Just the idea is to keep it covered at room temperature. How do I stretch a ball of dough into a pan-sized base without shrinking back? I'm in an air-conditioned home. Hey, Linda. So, really good question. How do I take my dough and put it into like a pan? I'm gonna guess like a square pan, like a pizza pan like this. I will essentially for me, I'm gonna use about at least 500 grams of dough. My dough ball's 250, so I would make 2 dough balls, which would I would oil this pan up, make one big dough ball and place it inside this pan and let that dough rest in this pan for 3 or 4 hours. And then I'll press it out to the corners. If I make my dough ball and try to press it, it's gonna be too elastic. That's why we let our dough final proof. It's like, think about your body going in a hot yoga class. You want it to be more supple. So we need that heat and time to hold our stretches, right? And we become more supple and our body becomes looser. Same thing with dough. We need to let it chill out. So let the dough do a little yoga class if you will. That clears the confusion with me. Awesome. You got it, Mark. So Linda, does that help at all? So make your dough ball, place it in here with oil underneath it, let it rest for 3 hours, and then we begin to stretch it to the corners. And be patient. You might make like 3 stretches over the course of 35, 40 minutes. Press it out, let it relax a little bit, press it out again. It'll keep extending. That makes sense. I hope it does. Awesome. Anybody else have a question on the dough? Anybody else hungry for pizza? I know I am. Yes, I'm transferring the dough to the steel baking sheet. Dough ball into a pan-sized base without shrinking. Okay, so yeah, so if you're not using this, you're just making a pizza, yeah, just stretch it by hand. Just get a large enough piece. If I'm trying to make a big square, this is a 250-gram dough ball that I just made a few minutes ago, right? So I want at least double the size of that. That's going to make a nice 10 or 12-inch pie. If you want to make it bigger, then yeah, a bigger piece of dough. I hope that answers that. Does anybody else have a question? You guys are super easy today. No questions, huh? No more? In 2 weeks, we're going to be doing a pizza class. We have some guests lined up for some really cool guests in May too. You're not going to want to miss them. Like, incredible. So can't wait. Then the steel doesn't have to be. Oh no, the steel. So Linda, you always want to preheat your steel. Keep it in the oven. Don't try to keep that in the oven. So I want to clarify that. My baking steels are in my oven right now at 500 degrees. My oven's on convection. Once my steels are hot, I do not touch them. That's why we have not put handles on our steels. We don't want anything to indicate that it's okay to touch this thing. It's not. So leave it in there. It's flat. It's hot. We make our pizzas here on the countertop. Then we transfer them into the oven. My preferred method, I could use a sheet pan and place this on top of the steel, or I'll use my pizza peel and I will shake it off into the oven onto my steel. I do not touch my steel ever. All right, I have a question. Ben, this is from Ben. My dough has been inconsistent. Sometimes it's very wet and sticky. This doesn't seem to affect the final result too much, but it's much harder to work with when forming dough balls. Any tips? Great. Ben, yes, great question. Do you measure your ingredients by weight with a scale? That would be my first question. Right? My second question would be, yes, and oh, awesome, great. So Ben does use a scale and he follows these instructions. Perfect. So here's a really good example. I am using a different flour today. I have not made pizza dough with this flour before. I've made English muffins, it's great. I've made dough, whatever, thousands of times by my hand. I typically always use a scale. Now, with this bread flour, it takes up the moisture differently than the bread flour I use from Central Milling. So I use 70% hydration with my recipe I've been making for years. This one at 70% felt a little drier. So it's absorbing the water differently. And I only know that from tribal knowledge, from doing this 1,000 times, thousands of times. I didn't even alter my recipe at all. However, I did notice it's a little drier. So flour and water are going to change. Ben, I would maybe really try to, in my experience, I would document the next time you make dough that you used 70%, say 350 grams. And then the next time you make it, put in 375 grams of water. Just tweak it up a little bit. And it's going to make, 1 or 2 percentage points difference, just to see if you can start seeing and feeling the difference in the amount of water that you use. That's one way that's going to help that. And then obviously document what kind of flour am I using? Am I using the same flour as usual? Like, is this absorbing the water the same? There's, again, the variables, again, the mad scientist bakers are going to be documenting the flour used, the time they made the dough, the temperature in the room, the temperature of the flour, the temperature of the mixture of the water and the flour combined. They're going to document all of those little micros and come up with their formula. So again, there's a lot of variables. Just try to document as much as you can so you can help feel what's going on the next time you make it. I hope that helps a little bit. Let's see. Yes, and this, okay. But my flour does change. Thank you. This is issues you started when I switched to King Arthur 00 flour. Yeah, that's going to absorb. It's a finer rind of the 00 flour. It's a different sift, if you will, than the bread flour from Central Milling. It will absorb the water differently. Again, we're using 70% hydration. These are pretty general. When I'm making this for myself, to be honest, I might tweak my recipe up to 73, 74% hydration. I like a little bit more water. To me, it creates a little bit more air bubbles, a little bit crispier, but it is trickier to work with. It's trickier to make your dough balls. Typically, I make my dough balls with my refrigerated dough. Cold dough is easier to ball up than room temperature dough. I mean, again, for me anyway, maybe it is most. I hope that helps. So again, there's a lot of different variables, different flours, different waters. Everything's different. Just change it up, document it, and you'll be amazed at how you can really tweak it in, dial that in. That help? Anybody else have any questions? Fun, explore, and take adventures. I love it. Tell your friends. We hope to see you guys again in the class in a couple of weeks. Email me, andres@bakingsteel.com. Any questions? Let's make some dough. Let's create. Let's have fun and tell your friends about it. All right. Thank you, guys.